In Victorian London, 10,000 pickpockets worked the shadows. More than half of those arrested were women or children. This criminal empire cost the city £2 million a year and turned crowded streets into hunting grounds. But behind the headlines lies the legend of Jenny Diver, the queen whose cunning tricks became criminal law. What secrets did these light-fingered ladies pass down, and how did they transform crime itself? The full story begins now. Each day in Victorian London, the threat of pickpocketing was impossible to ignore. Police reports counted as many as 10,000 active thieves moving through the city's crowded thoroughfares. Markets, omnibuses, and railway stations became hunting grounds, where a simple jostle could mean the loss of a purse or a pocket watch. By the 1860s, the value of stolen goods reached an estimated £2 million a year, a staggering sum that touched every level of society. Women and children made up more than half of those arrested, their small hands and innocent looks giving them an edge in the blur of the crowd. For many Londoners, the fear of a light touch in a busy street was a daily reality, fueling both public anxiety and the stories that would soon become legend. Jenny Diver's story began in the crowded streets of the 18th century in London, where she rose from poverty to become the city's most notorious pickpocket. Born Mary Young around 1700, she mastered the art of theft under the guidance of a seasoned gang and quickly earned her nickname for her skill at diving into pockets. Her reputation grew not only for daring, but for ingenuity. Later, accounts credited her with inventing the infamous false arms trick. Sitting with lifelike prosthetic arms in her lap, she could distract onlookers while her real hands worked unseen. Her exploits had captured the public imagination. After her execution at Tyburn in 1741, her legend only grew. John Gay's The Beggar's Opera transformed her into a symbol of cunning and resourcefulness, and it cemented her place as the origin myth for generations of light-fingered women who followed. Victorian pickpocketing was a craft built on precision, teamwork, and a language all its own. The core technique, known as dipping, demanded years of practice. To dip, a thief would slide stiff, open fingers into a pocket or purse, snatch what could be hooked, and withdraw the hand in a single fluid motion. Speed and silence were everything. Hesitation meant discovery. Manuals of the time described the movement as quick, straight, and almost invisible, with the best dippers able to lift a handkerchief or watch before the victim felt a thing. But few operated alone. Success depended on the careful choreography of a team. The stall was the master of distraction. A staller's job was to create a diversion, perhaps a sudden quarrel, a stumble, or a spilled basket, drawing eyes away from the dipper's hand. In a crowded market or aboard an omnibus, a well-timed stall could mean the difference between a clean escape and a trip to the magistrate. Another specialist, the buzz, targeted women's reticules and tie-on pockets. Victorian fashion meant women carried their valuables in small purses, often hidden beneath skirts or shawls. Buzzers used nimble fingers to slip a purse free, or, in some cases, slice it loose with a concealed blade. Large capes or shawls helped conceal the act, and the confusion of the crowd covered the exit. Each member of a pickpocket team had a defined role. The dipper made the grab, the staller distracted, and the lookout watched for police or trouble. Sometimes a child would be used to slip through tight spaces or pass stolen goods. Teams communicated with nods and glances, moving as a single unit through the chaos of London's busiest streets. These methods were passed down through generations, taught in lodging houses and rookeries, and refined with every new trick learned on the streets. The art of the dip was not just about theft. It was about mastery of movement, trust among partners, and an unspoken code that made London's pickpocket queens a force in the shadows. Ellen Reece's name carried a quiet weight among the pickpockets who haunted the financial heart of London. In the maze of alleys around the Bank of England, she moved with the practiced confidence of someone who had spent decades perfecting her craft. Her specialty was the well-dressed gentlemen, bank clerks, businessmen, and brokers who believed themselves immune to street crime. Ellen watched their routines, noting the way they stuffed notes and pocketbooks into coat linings or the shallow pockets of their trousers. She rarely worked alone. Instead, she assembled a rotating circle of female accomplices, each with a role as precise as any stage play. One might jostle a mark at the steps of a hansom cab. Another would spill a basket of apples in the path, and Ellen's hand would slip into a pocket, extracting a purse or watch in a single, fluid motion. Court records from the 1860s and 1870s describe teams like hers operating with military discipline. The Bank District was their hunting ground, but they shifted locations as needed, moving from Cheapside to Cornhill, always keeping a step ahead of the constables. Over 2 decades, Ellen's share of the takings was rumoured to have reached £5,000, a fortune by the standards of the day. The proceeds vanished into the rookeries, spent on rent, bribes, and the daily necessities of survival. Yet every success brought new risks. Detectives began to recognize her face, and former allies turned informant for the promise of a lighter sentence. In 1873, Ellen's luck ran out. She was caught red-handed near Threadneedle Street, her hand still closed around a silk purse filled with banknotes. The trial at the Old Bailey was swift. As a repeat offender, the sentence was transportation to Australia, a punishment intended to sweep the city clean of its most persistent criminals. For most, this would have been the end of the story, but Ellen's determination did not fade. By the 1880s, she was back in London, older now, but undeterred. She returned to the only trade she knew, slipping once more into the crowds, her reputation as enduring as the city's shadows. Ellen Reece's story was not just one of crime, but of survival in a world that offered few second chances. In the heart of Victorian London's slums, the business of pickpocketing began early. Children as young as 5 were introduced to the trade, not by chance, but through a system that thrived in the city's most desperate neighbourhoods. In places like the St. Giles Rookery, crowded tenements doubled as training grounds. Experienced thieves, sometimes called professors, taught their youngest recruits to slip handkerchiefs from suspended coats rigged with bells. The goal was simple: move quickly and quietly, or everyone would hear your failure. Henry Mayhew, writing in the 1850s, described these makeshift schools where girls and boys practiced for hours, learning to dip and pass stolen goods with barely a glance. Poverty was the driving force. Families depended on what their children could steal, and the line between home and criminal enterprise blurred. The same networks that produced street pickpockets laid the groundwork for larger gangs like the 40 Elephants, who would later dominate department store theft. In these rookeries, skill was survival, and every lesson in sleight of hand was a lesson in endurance against a city that offered little mercy. Punishment for pickpocketing in Victorian London was swift and relentless. First-time offenders often received just a few months in prison. But for those with previous convictions, the consequences grew far harsher. Many women faced transportation to Australia, a sentence that tore families apart and offered little hope of return. Court records from the 1860s list women with 10, 20, even 30 previous arrests, their names appearing again and again in sentencing tables. For most, release from prison meant a return to the same crowded streets, with few options beyond crime. The police, overwhelmed by the scale of street theft, began to adapt. By the 1860s, plainclothes officers started riding omnibuses and mingling in markets, hoping to catch thieves in the act. These early undercover operations, reported in newspapers of the time, led to dozens of arrests in a single week. The tactic proved so effective that it became a foundation for modern detective work. Today's security patrols and surveillance cameras trace their roots to these Victorian innovations when the fight against pickpockets forced the law to think like the criminals they pursued. Street theft no longer dominates London's headlines, but the ingenuity and desperation behind those Victorian hands still shapes the city's security today. Surveillance and plainclothes patrols trace their origins here. Every crowded street remains a silent reminder. Methods evolve, but opportunity and poverty are never history. What do you notice in crowds now?